بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So tonight inshallah we're going to study the chapter of udhiyah. We're going to study the chapter of udhiyah, many masail containing to udhiyah, the animals to slaughter in udhiyah, how to slaughter. We're going to touch on things connected to the rules of udhiyah itself, some rules connecting to Eid itself, and thereafter in the next chapter after we study udhiyah, we're going to study the fiqh of slaughtering inshallah, because they connect with udhiyah. So then those masail from slaughtering, they can just be mixed in with udhiyah at the time of slaughtering, to cover all the masail connected to this chapter as far as possible inshallah. So to begin, Allah Azza wa Jal, in Dhul Hijjah, Allah Azza wa Jal blesses a certain selected group of people to perform hajj. And in hajj, there's a few rituals that those people do. One of those rituals being taking and slaughtering what is called for hajj a hadi. So hadi has a few meanings. In this case, it would refer to an animal that they slaughter on the day of Eid. An animal that they slaughter on the day of Eid. And connected to that, what else the Hujjaj do is they have other things. Because of being in ihraam, there's a few things that are generally permissible. But in ihraam they're not permissible, like removing hair and nails, etc. So they're known as the mahdhurat of ihraam. So that Allah has blessed those people who are chosen to perform hajj. And those people who do not have the opportunity to perform hajj, at least in that year anyway, Allah has blessed them with a few actions that resemble the actions of the Hujjaj, so they can get their own reward. One of those things being, at the time when the Hujjaj are slaughtering their animal, their hadi, Allah has blessed people who are not in hajj to be slaughtering an animal as well. So they resemble and have something in common with those in hajj, number one. Number two, it's recommended, as we'll discuss later on, for a person who wishes to slaughter, that he does not remove his hair and his nails and his skin. So that has a type of resemblance with some of the mahdhurat of ihram, that those people in ihram, that they cannot remove a few things, or they cannot do a few things. Amongst them is removing hair, nails, etc., just the same as the person who wants to slaughter. So Allah blesses those people who are not slaughtering, who are not performing hajj, with certain actions to resemble those who are in hajj. Now, with regards to udhiyah, Allah Azza wa Jal tells us that these animals to be slaughtered, this is from the symbols of Allah. Allah says, وَالْبُدْنَ جَعَلْنَاهَا لَكُم مِّن شَعَائِرِ اللَّهِ. Allah has made these animals, the budna, that you're slaughtering either at hajj or in udhiyah, from the symbols of Allah. And Allah tells us that those people who venerate the symbols of Allah, then that is a sign of the piety of their heart. Allah says, وَمَن يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. Whoever venerates and exalts these symbols of Allah, that's a sign of the piety in the heart. That's a sign of the piety in the heart. So how do we exalt and venerate this symbol of Allah of udhiyah? The ulama say it's with three things. Number one, it's to have the intention to slaughter. To have the intention to slaughter at udhiyah, number one. Number two, it is to perform the udhiyah in an open manner, to make it apparent, to do it to people together and to slaughter, and to have the happiness and the joyous occasion of Eid and of slaughtering and this bounty of Allah, that it's apparent and out and people gather together for it and it's apparent amongst everyone. And number three, it is to learn the rules connected to udhiyah. That's one of the ways of venerating this symbol of Allah, which is a sign of the piety in the heart. So now Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, إِنَّ أَفْضَلَ أَيَّامِكُمْ يَوْمُ النَّحْرِ ثُمَّ يَوْمُ الْقَرِّ. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that the best day of the year is the day of Nahr, the day of slaughtering. And that is on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. And the next best day is Yawmul Qarr, which is the 11th of Dhul Hijjah. So the best day of the year, according to many ulama, is the day of Nahr, the day of Eid al-Adha. That is the best day. And we've said many times that a time being blessed, what's the best actions to do in those times? The best action to do in a blessed time are those actions that have been narrated. And the best action to do on the day of udhiyah on the day of slaughtering, on the day of Eid al-Adha, is to slaughter. It's to slaughter. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said in Ibn Majah that the best action a person can do to gain closeness to Allah on this day of Eid is to slaughter. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself slaughtered. He slaughtered on Eid al-Adha. He slaughtered on behalf of himself, he slaughtered on behalf of his family, and he slaughtered on behalf of all those Muslimin who are not able to slaughter. To the extent where Daraqutni narrates from Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Man kana lahu sa'ah falam yudah." Whoever has the financial muscle to perform udhiyah and he does not slaughter, فَلْيَعْتَزِلْ مُصَلَّانَا, then this person should not come to our musalla. He should not pray Eid with us. Now we'll mention it later on the ruling of udhiyah, but many of the ulama do not take this hadith to mean that udhiyah is wajibah. Many of them do not take this hadith to indicate that udhiyah is wajibah. Rather, this hadith is kind of showing emphasis to slaughter. So it's an emphasized sunnah to slaughter. It's an emphasized sunnah to slaughter. And in saying that, udhiyah itself, there's no specific virtue narrated to it. And that does not mean that there's less virtue to it. We mentioned in the past that there's a few very virtuous actions. There's no authentic hadith coming to mention the virtue of this action itself. We mentioned this with regards to i'tikaf. And we mentioned in the Eid lecture that the same thing applies to slaughtering, the udhiyah. There are many ahadith, there are few ahadith narrated of the virtue of udhiyah, but none of them are authentic. But the ulama narrate them because the base of this action of slaughtering, that is authentic. But the virtues regarded to it, there the ulama go easier with the authenticity of ahadith that have to do with virtuous actions. So for this, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was asked by some of the Sahaba, مَا لَنَا فِيهَا, then what do we get out of slaughtering? What do we get out of slaughtering? So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, بِكُلِّ شَعْرَةٍ حَسَنَةٍ, for every hair on the animal, you will get a reward. So listen to the sharpness of the Sahaba. They said, Ya Rasulullah, what about those who have wool? Because not all the animals that you slaughter on Eid al-Adha have hair. The hair is for the goat and for the cattle. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, for every fiber of wool, there'll be a reward. For every fiber of wool, there'll be a reward. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, before the first drop of blood touches the ground, Allah will already forgive the person. Before the first drop of blood touches the ground, Allah will already forgive the person. And a few ahadith have been narrated of the virtues of udhiyah. And we said the authenticity is questionable. But this action in itself is very virtuous, and it's the most virtuous thing to do on the day of Eid al-Adha. So the fact there's no specific hadith, authentic hadith about the virtue, does not decrease in the virtue of such an action. So in saying this ritual of udhiyah, this ritual of slaughtering teaches us something else. And it's something very important with regards to action in general, or with regards to actions in general. And that is this ritual of udhiyah. We've discussed in the past when we mentioned zakatul fitr, that some of the ulama mentioned there's a wisdom why, which is the Hanafi ulama I found it in. They mentioned there's the wisdom behind why zakatul fitr, you can do qada of it if the time is over. But they say udhiyah you do not do qada of the udhiyah if the time is past. And they say because the reason of the sacrifice of udhiyah, the reason of the sacrifice itself, they mentioned, according to them, that it's not clearly understood why this aspect, this whole slaughtering ritual takes place. It's one that Allah commands us to do. For wisdom, Allah knows, like salah. Why do we perform so many raka'at? In the manner we perform salah, in the times we perform salah, Allah commanded us with. But the clear wisdom behind it, we don't know the exact wisdom. Yes, for salah and for fasting, etc., in the times of the salah, some ulama have tried to deduce why there's 4 raka'at in dhuhr, 2 in fajr, why you read dhuhr after zawal, why you read fajr after dawn, etc., or at dawn. But for udhiyah, this actual aspect of slaughtering, they say, we don't know the actual meaning. Because for charity, a person could give monetary charity, a person could give meat, a person could do something else to give the charity. Different, if we're going to say the aspect is to feed, or the aspect is meat, or charity, spending the money, etc. That can be achieved in another way other than actual slaughtering. So that tells us that this actual ritual of slaughtering teaches us something further. It teaches us a certain submission to Allah even when we don't understand the reason of the action. And tied to that is something very important, and that is that it shows that udhiyah, slaughtering, or in a broader manner, actions in general, they have a connection to something deeper, which is the connection of the heart, a connection to taqwa. That's why Rasulullah said, وَالتَّقْوَى هَا هُنَا, and he pointed to his chest. He said 3 times, taqwa is here, taqwa is here, taqwa is here, and he pointed to his chest, he pointed to his heart being in the chest, he pointed there, saying that the place of taqwa is in the heart, the actual place of taqwa is in the heart. And Allah indicates to this when He says, لَن يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. That He says what gets raised up and reaches Allah is not specifically the meat of the animal, or it's not specifically the blood of the animal, but rather it is your taqwa. Rather it is your taqwa that gets raised to Allah. Yes, some of the Mufassirin say it's your good actions done with iman that get raised to Allah, which is a meaning of taqwa, which is connected to taqwa. But taqwa is what the verse of the Quran says, so we're focusing on that because the aspect of taqwa is the heart. So it shows that this apparent action has a connection to the heart, and it shows that the aspect of the heart and its correctness with Allah has a connection to apparent actions. That's why this taqwa would not reach Allah without the action that's done apparently. Without the slaughtering, this taqwa would have no extra virtue connected to Allah. And the slaughtering without taqwa, without any heart connection, without any intention for the sake of Allah, without anything further connected to taqwa, this action of slaughtering would have no virtue with Allah. And that shows that there's a connection, as I said, between the heart and good actions. So none of them can suffice over the other. Someone cannot say, why should I pray? Or why should I do this? Or why should I not do this? Or I'm not going to pray, or I'm not going to do this. Because Allah knows what's in my heart, and what matters is what's in my heart. And neither can a person say that I pray, or I fast, or I perform tahajjud, or whatever of that nature of ibadat that I've done with an action, and then in his heart it's filled with things that are not pleasing to Allah. So that heart is filled with jealousy, it's filled with envy, it's filled with those kind of things that are not, Allah is not pleased with. So those two will not go. They have to be together. They have to be together. A person has to do good actions, and that action has an effect on the heart, and they both go to Allah. Or a person has a good heart that leads him, a pure, clean heart. As Rasulullah ﷺ spoke of a piece of flesh in the body, if that flesh is upright, then it will lead to the outward appearance and the outward actions of the body to be upright. And if it is not upright, the heart is not upright, it will have an effect on the body. And the actions you will do, they will not be upright. So if Allah says pray, if Allah says do this, and you say I'm not doing it, or I don't need to do it because Allah knows what's in the heart, or my heart is clean, or my heart is pure, they don't go. They don't go. What's in the heart will come on the actions, and what's on the actions should have an effect on the heart if the action is done properly. And that's why here, this ibadah specifically, Allah points out the connection between the two. Even though apparently there's no real reason why the specific slaughtering might be there according to these ulama who mention it. But yet, it has a connection to the heart, that it will be raised when the heart is pure. Or the taqwa is what that goes to Allah. But the taqwa will not go without action. And the action will not go without the taqwa. They both go hand in hand. They both go hand in hand. So as much as a person wants to claim rightness of the heart, righteousness of the heart, he also has to watch his action. And as much as a person wants to do the best of actions, but he has to watch his heart. Otherwise, none of them would help. They have to go in together. They have to go in together. So, after this introduction, we'll mention what the fuqaha mention in the books. And the way this book is structured, they speak first on the animal. They speak first on the animal, because they connect it here to hadi. Hadi, as we said, is connected to the animal you slaughtered, hajj. So they mention this chapter, the Hanbali fuqaha, after the chapter of hajj, after the chapter or the end of the chapters of hajj, because one of the last actions you do is slaughtering. Or one of the, it's not one of the last one, but it's closer towards the end, is that you slaughter. So they connect it here. Other fuqaha would mention it in different places in the book, near food and near hunting. So they mention the chapter of slaughtering, and but udhiyah is a separate one. Udhiyah is a separate one. They mention it closer to hadi. So here they mention it close to hadi, and therefore they mention the ahkam of an animal first, the rules of an animal first, and thereafter they mention rules connected to udhiyah itself. So who should slaughter, what parts, who should slaughter, how do we select an animal to slaughter, and things like that, which we'll discuss inshallah. So now the definition of udhiyah, the ulama say that udhiyah is ما يذبح من بهيمة الأنعام الأهلية في أيام العيد أو في أيام النحر بسبب العيد تقربا إلى الله. So that's what they say is the definition of udhiyah. They say what you slaughter of domesticated animals. They say domesticated animals. The only animals you can slaughter for Eid al-Adha are, number one, domesticated animals. But which domesticated animals? They say either a sheep or a goat or cattle, which means cows, which means bulls, which means ox and buffaloes, which means ox and buffaloes in the Hanbali madhab. So buffaloes, what we mentioned for cows, the same rules apply to ox or bulls or buffaloes. And number three, you can slaughter a camel. You can slaughter a camel. That means that, for example, any animal, that means that any animal from these 4 or 5 animals, from that category, they have to be domesticated. So if they're a wild animal, they won't count. You cannot slaughter them. For example, you have a mountain goat. A mountain goat is a wild animal. It's deemed a wild animal. It's not deemed a domesticated animal. So such animals you cannot slaughter, even if it falls into those categories, but it's a wild animal, you cannot slaughter. So it has to be from those animals and it has to be domesticated. Then they say, that means they say the animals that you slaughter from these animals, domesticated animals, on the days of Eid. So they say the days of slaughtering, as we'll mention in detail later, it's the day of Eid, the day after Eid, and the third day of Eid. So you can slaughter on 3 days. And that includes, in a few of the madhahib, at night as well. So Hanbali madhab and Hanafi madhab and also the Shafi'i madhab, and at night. In the Maliki madhab do not say it. And then we'll mention whether it's makruh or not to slaughter at night. So you can slaughter on day of Eid, night of Eid, day 11, night 11, and day 12. So those are the days of Eid. Then they say, number 3, بسبب العيد. So the reason you're slaughtering is because of Eid. So the reason you're slaughtering is because of Eid. You're not slaughtering for hajj, or you're not slaughtering for ihraam. For ihraam, for example, you did one of those things we mentioned as the mahdhurat of ihraam. Those things that are not permissible for a person to do in ihraam, and a fidya, an expiation for that thing which he did is to slaughter an animal. These things will not count even if you slaughter it on the day of Eid or at the time of slaughtering, but the intention is for ihraam or the intention is for hajj, it won't count as udhiyah. So it has to be with the intention of udhiyah, for the reason being the reason of Eid. And then the last thing is to get closeness to Allah. What does that mean? Why do they mention that? Because when they mention intention in the beginning of the fiqh books, they say you don't have to specifically intend that you're doing an action for the sake of Allah, because it should and has to be and will be for the sake of Allah. So why do they mention it here in the definition? And that is because to make a differentiation for what the animal could be slaughtered for. So an animal that you slaughter on the days of Eid, one of those few animals, the correct specifications, but it's slaughtered for example, for the meat or to sell, that will not count as udhiyah. So it has to be for the sake of Allah. So this is the definition of udhiyah. And the definitions, as we said last time, the fuqaha try to cover many masail, or the main masail, in a definition. They try to cover the main masail or many masail in a definition. Just like that, they've covered quite a few masail in the definition. Then they speak of which are the best animals to slaughter. So they say the best animal to slaughter for udhiyah is, number 1, a camel. They say a camel. Number 2, a cow or cattle, cow, ox or bull, etc. And number 3, a sheep or a goat. But they say that to slaughter a complete sheep, which means to slaughter one entire camel or one entire cow, because as we're going to mention just now, that a cow 7 people can share into it, and a camel 7 people can share into it. So if a person shares into it, it has a different rule in terms of which one is better. We're going to mention it now. But if a person were to sacrifice on behalf of himself the entire animal, the entire camel or the entire cow, then that would be better than slaughtering and sacrificing an entire sheep. So that means camel and cow is better if it's the whole animal is sacrificed on behalf of one person, than a sheep or a goat. And they say a sheep is better to slaughter than a goat. They say a sheep is better to slaughter than a goat because they say sheep meat is more tender. It's more tender and better than goat meat. So they say sheep is better than a goat. And they say the evidence for this is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in Muslim that whoever takes من اغتسل يوم الجمعة غسل الجنابة. Whoever performs on the day of Jumu'ah a ghusl of janaba. So that teaches us something, that in most actions that require a ghusl, most sunnah actions that require a sunnah ghusl, like on Friday, like on the day of Eid, like in ihraam for example, when before ihraam, when you need to take a ghusl, whether it's a sunnah to take a ghusl, the manner of ghusl will be the same one that applies to the general shar'i ghusl. There's two types. There's the obligatory type that covers everything without the sunnah method fulfilled, and the second type is the full sunnah procedure. So that's what is meant. That's what is meant when they say ghusl, when they say ghusl. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, then the person goes out, فَرَاحَ فِي السَّاعَةِ الْأُولَى فَكَأَنَّمَا قَرَّبَ بَدَنَهُ. That if he went out in the first hour, it's as if he sacrificed a camel. And if he went out for Jumu'ah in the second hour, it is as if he sacrificed a cow. And if he went out in the third hour, then it's as if he sacrificed a ram, a male sheep. With horns, a horned male sheep or male sheep. And number 4, if he went out in the 4th hour, it's as if he sacrificed a chicken. And if he went out in the 5th hour, it's as if he sacrificed an egg. It's as if he sacrificed an egg. So how do you work the hours on the day of Jumu'ah? The ulama differ with many saying from the time the sun rises to the time of Jumu'ah. From sunrise to Jumu'ah, you count how many hours and you divide it into 5. You count how many hours, if it's 10 hours for example, or let's say 5 hours between sunrise and Jumu'ah, and then that means every hour counts as the first hour is the first hour in the hadith. Let's say it's 10. Let's say 10 hours between sunrise and Jumu'ah, then 2 hours would refer to the first hour mentioned in the hadith. So if somebody went within the first 2 hours, they'll get the reward of sacrificing a camel. And the second hour, the second 2 hours, which would be group 2, will be as if he got the reward of sacrificing a cow. And like that, the hadith goes. And from there, the ulama of the madhab say that that's the virtue of slaughtering the animal. And also they say that you'd spend more money in buying a camel. And also the camel will most likely, in many cases, or most cases, have more meat. So that is one of the objectives of slaughtering, is the meat. And then they say that after you have camel, then you have cow, then you have sheep. Then they say, or sheep or goat. Then they say the next best thing, the 4th best thing is to have a share in a cow or a camel. To have a share in a cow or a camel. To have a share in a cow or a camel. But they say to slaughter a sheep or a goat itself is better than taking a share in a cow or a camel. So now here we said what? To take one share in a cow or a camel. Slaughtering a goat or a sheep would be better than taking one share in a goat or a camel. So what if a person takes 2 shares in a goat or a camel? Would that be better, or should he slaughter a cow, a sheep or a goat? So here the Shafi'i ulama touch on this, and they say that taking 2 shares in a camel or a cow would be more virtuous than slaughtering 1 sheep. So that would be the difference there. And then the ulama say that does a person, because a camel or a cow can count for 7 people. So they say slaughtering 7 sheep is better than slaughtering 1 cow or 1 camel. They say because one of the objectives of udhiyah is actual slaughtering. And this would happen more times with 7 animals than 1 animal, even though 1 big animal. So they say 7 sheep or goats would be better than slaughtering 1 cow or 1 camel. And then what is better? Does a person, if he's going to spend some money, does he spend an amount on getting a cow or a camel, or getting an expensive sheep? Or does he spend the same amount, or does he spend less amount but get more camels or cows? Or does he spend the same amount but buying more animals? So more animals or less animals but a more expensive price. That's what we're looking at. So more animals versus less animals but a more expensive price. So here the ulama say, most of the ulama say, that to buy more animals would be more virtuous than slaughtering less animals, even if it's more expensive. Because they say the objective is actual slaughtering. And having more animals would get that objective done better than getting 1 animal that you're going to slaughter. And this is connected to a mas'ala where the ulama look at, and they say, if you have one action, you have one time to do one action. You have, let's say, 10 minutes, that's it. You can only do one action. So do you do an action that has more things connected to it? Or do you do the same action or a similar action that has less things connected to it? Meaning, you have 10 minutes. Do you either pray 4 raka'at of salah that has more ruku' and more sajda because it's 4 raka'at, or do you pray 2 raka'at that has longer qiyam, for example? So here, again, it's one time you can do 2 actions. One has more actions to it. The other one has less actions to it, but it has more weight in it. Because 2 raka'at done slower, more recitation, etc. versus 4 raka'at, which less recitation, but it has more movements, more actions in it. Or they would say, does a person recite more Quran, let's say in Ramadan or in a period of time? He has half an hour. Does he sit and recite Quran quickly without really pondering over it? Or does he sit and he ponders over the Quran more? Another example they give is a person who challenges himself and fights with his own nafs to do an action, compared to a person who finds actions easier, to do, and he already is used to them, accustomed to them, enjoys them. So let's say getting up for Salatul Fajr. One person is used to it, it's a habit, he enjoys, he finds sweetness in Salatul Fajr. That's how they phrase it in the books. This person gets up to perform Salah, compared to a person who struggles to get up for Salah, and he puts the alarm and tries to get up and make sure he gets, so it's a challenge on himself to go for Salah, to perform Salatul Fajr. So here what happened, there's 2 actions, because the one is challenging and overcoming oneself, and then the Salah. And for the other person, it's just the Salah. So they ask which one is better, and sometimes the ulama prefer the action that has more actions in it compared to the one that has less, and at other times they prefer those actions that have less things in it, but done in a more, let's say, where more quantity is there or more weight is there. So they say the same thing, for a person in Mecca, does he do more tawaf or does he do more umrah? What would be better? For example, it falls into this mas'ala. In this case, the Hanbali madhab say that to slaughter more animals is better than slaughtering less animals, even if less animals are more expensive. And Shaykh Taqiyuddin Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi, he says that the best thing to slaughter is that which is the most expensive. He says it got to do with pricey. Whatever is the most expensive, that's better to slaughter, irrespective of whether it's a cow or camel or sheep or goat. Whatever it is, the one that's most expensive, that's what counts. So now connected to this, Ibn Qudama rahmatullahi alayhi, he says the best thing to slaughter is a ram, a male sheep. He says because that is the sheep Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or that is the animal Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam slaughtered. So he said the best thing to do is to do exactly what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did, slaughtering a male sheep, a ram. And they say it's better for the animal to have horns, because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam slaughtered aqran, an animal that was horned. So now we said the best animal to choose is a camel, or after that a cow, after that a goat or a sheep. So now, okay, here's your camels in front of you, or here's your cows in front of you, or here's your sheep in front of you. You have a few to choose from. You've gone to the farm and there's a few in front of you. Which one do you choose? So you've already, let's say you had a choice, camel, cow, or sheep, and you went for camel, or you went for cow. So you went for second best or third best, or you've gone for the best, according to whatever you wished for, according to your financial muscle at that moment, whatever it may be. Now you've went, which one do you choose? Which animal do you choose? They say now you choose the animal that has the fattest animal, the animal that is the most meaty, not just fat, but meat fat, or the most meaty. You choose that animal. And if they are plus minus similar in their fatness or their meatiness, then thereafter the second thing you look at is the one that's the most expensive. So then you go for that. And if they are all similar price, the third thing you go for is the color of the animal. So the ulama they differentiate which colors are the best. They have some ahadith and some reasons, like they mention whichever one is deemed the most beautiful. So they mention different colors, and they say the one that is a full white. That's the best color to choose from the animals. Or the one that whiteness is more than its black. The one that's white, that's more than its black, is the second best. The third best is an animal that is yellowish, that is a yellowish color. Then the fourth best is black. The last one will be a completely black animal. I think the Shafi'i school, they have a few more colors, like brown and other colors there. And then black being the last one. And some of the fuqaha give a reason. They say it's got to do with beauty. They say because generally the black one is deemed the least beautiful. But if it were to be the other way in certain places, perhaps saying then they deem, let's say in whatever place, whatever culture, the black is the most deemed the best or the best looking, etc., then to slaughter that might then be the best animal to slaughter. Because the hadith that they use may not be authentic to be proper evidence, and therefore they just use general other reasonings. or the ahadith that are weak, they use it to show which color would be best, and the colors, they mention it like that. And the ulama say that male and female animals here for udhiyah, they equal. There's no more virtue slaughtering a male over a female or a female over a male. Unlike zakah. In zakah, female most of the time, or in fact all of the time, would be better. Most of the time, the person who comes to take an animal, or the person who has to give an animal, has to give a female, except in 3 or 4 situations where it's okay to give a male. But here, male and female are equal. They say that a male will have more meat on it. Generally, a male has more meat on it. But a female has more tender meat. So therefore, they cancel each other out, and they become the same level of equalness in terms of virtue. Which one would be better? They become equal. And also the ayat and the ahadith that speak of an animal, specifically the ayat, they do not specify male or female. So both are equal. Then the next thing they speak about is an animal where there's interbreeding. So now this sheep is born from, let's say, let's put it into 2 categories. So they say interbreeding. If the animal is born from 2 animals, one of them it's permissible to slaughter with, so camel, goat, sheep or cow, or bull or fox, etc. And the other one is from an animal that you're not allowed to slaughter with. The other one is from an animal you're not allowed to slaughter with. That animal, the child, you cannot slaughter. Okay, number 1. Because it follows, because they say here's permissible and impermissible. The description of permissibility and description of impermissibility in one thing. Therefore, in general, majority of the time, they say فَيُغْلَبْ الْحَظْرِ, that the prohibition takes preference over the permissibility. So this is a common principle, especially when we discuss the fiqh of food, etc. Then when there's something that you have permissibility and impermissibility in it, you're going to give impermissibility preference out of safety. So here you do that there. The same principles apply when you have an animal. When you have this animal you're going to slaughter, the child, or it's not specifically a child, but it's born from one father is domesticated and the other father is on the other parent, or one parent is domesticated, the other parent is wild. So here, let's say from it's a goat born from a domesticated goat and from a wild goat. This animal that is in front of you, born from these 2 parents, you cannot slaughter. Because you're going to say again that you're going to give preference to the side that is haram. You give preference in this case to the side where it's haram, and therefore you don't slaughter it out of precaution. The same thing when we're going to discuss slaughtering, for example. If you slaughtered an animal and then it fell into, or it ran away, or you shot an animal and it ran into water. So then the animal's in water and it kind of seems like it drowned. So now you can't tell, did it drown because it lost its life from your bullet and then it drowned, or did it drown because the water drowned it? So here you have an aspect that makes it halal, which is your bullet, or if you could throw a bow and arrow at it, that is the halal aspect. And the water, the animal drowning, or it fell from a high place as it's running away, and then it fell, or not even a high place, just something to indicate that something else killed it. So that becomes impermissible. So you give preference to impermissibility, and that animal becomes haram. So these are examples of where this principle gets applied. Same thing, you can apply it in many cases. An animal, whether it's halal or haram, born from an animal, one you can eat and the other animal you can't eat. So for example, the animal is born, one parent being an animal you can eat, for example a horse, and the other one being a donkey. So this child, whether we can call it a mule, you can't eat it because one of the parents are an animal that you're not allowed to eat. So you give that rule to the child, you give that rule to the animal born from it. So that's an example there. But they say if there's interbreeding between these species that you can slaughter. So for example, there's an animal born from a sheep and a goat, or a sheep and a cow, or a cow and a camel. For example, they mention it in fiqh for the sake of fiqh. If it were to happen, what would you say here? You say you can slaughter with this animal. It would be valid. And when it comes to the age of the animal to slaughter, because now this one here is a sheep, and a sheep has a lesser age to a goat or to a cow, then we're going to discuss it just now. Which age do you take? So we'll mention it there. So now when it comes to this animal, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَمَن يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. Whoever exalts and venerates these symbols of Allah, that's a sign of the piety of the heart. So some of the mufassirin, like Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, when connecting this, venerating the symbol of Allah of udhiyah, he mentions it's istismanuha wa istihsanuha. He says when you get the animal that you're going to slaughter, he says first of all it's to choose the best animal that you can to slaughter. That's from venerating the symbols of Allah, is to choose an animal that's the best that you can slaughter. And thereafter to become familiar with it, to nourish it, to feed it to become fat, because we say that the fatter an animal, the one that's meatier, that's better to slaughter. So to do that, once you get the animal, you can get the animal in advance, however long in advance. If you're buying it, if you own it, you can decide which one you're probably going to slaughter. And then you can feed it, nourish it, special care to it. That is from venerating the symbols of Allah. That is from venerating the symbols to Allah, to give extra care to the animal that you're going to slaughter for the sake of Allah. For the sake of Allah. You're going to slaughter it for the sake of Allah, and you're going to give it extra care for the sake of Allah. For the sake of Allah. Then the next mas'ala is when it comes to the age of an animal. So they say that for a sheep, they say it must be jadha'. So they say this sheep must be 6 months old. So now when it comes to the age of the animal, you look at it according to lunar months, not solar months. So you look it through the lunar calendar, not the Gregorian calendar. So then it must be 6 months. And some of the ulama say it must be approximately 6 months. So that means a day or two less will not affect. And many times rules in Sharia, especially when it comes to things like this, it's out of approximate. So in zakah, it's common to things being approximate. Your day of zakah, they say, can be approximate. So not exactly at the hour. You have the nisab today at 10 a.m. So a year later, let's say it's the 12th of Dhul Qa'dah. Then a year later on the 12th of Dhul Qa'dah at 10 a.m. Is that your zakat time? Yes, it is in theory, but you allowed approximately a bit later or a bit earlier, as we'll discuss when we discuss zakah. The same thing with zakah from crops and things like that. It's an approximate amount. The fuqaha mentioned that. So here they allow approximate as well. A day or two less will not affect. And how do we know the age? So they say, if you ask the buyer that you're going to, if you ask the seller, the person you're going to buy the animal from, if you are going to buy the animal, and that person tells you that it's this age, then if the person is trustworthy, then you can take his word for it. And if the person is not trustworthy, seems untrustworthy, known not to be trustworthy in his speech, then in Islamic law, for example, they say you must take an oath or bring, the seller would have to take an oath or bring witnesses to prove that actually this age is like this. Witnesses, or bring some proof that the age is like this. So he'll have to take an oath, for example, that this sheep is 7 months. So why the fuqaha, those who mention this mas'ala, say 7 months out of precaution, that it's over the age. So out of precaution, yes, it is 7 months, or it is 6.5 months, not maybe 5.5. It's clearly like that. Or they say if a person can tell the age, if a person himself can tell the age of the animal, then that's enough. So for a sheep, some of the fuqaha, Abu al-Qasim al-Khiraqi from the Hanabila, he says, I heard my father ask shepherds, how do we know the age? How do we know when the sheep is 6 months? So they said to him that generally when sheep are born, then the hair, their wool on their back, it's kind of standing. And then after 6 months, then it kind of slants or now falls down onto the back. So it's then when we say ajda'a as-suf. So they say now the wool has become jada', now it's become 6 months. So that's what it is for a description there of the animal. And for other animals, they usually do it with the molar teeth. The molar teeth should start coming out or come out at a certain age. So they say, the Hanabila say, for a goat, it must finish 1 year and start the next year. It must go into the second year. And for a cow, it must finish the second year and it must go into the third year. And for a camel, it must finish 5 years and start going into the sixth year. So it must be at 5 years plus a camel, a cow 2 years plus, a goat 1 year plus. Then these animals you can slaughter. And then when it comes to a cross or interbreeding or crossbreeding animal, that's let's say from a cow and for a sheep, then you take the age of the animal that has the higher age. So in this case, the higher age would be a cow. Cow is, we said, 2 years plus. So when this crossbreed of cow and sheep reaches 2 years plus, then you can slaughter the sheep. So you don't look at the lower age or the animal of the lower age. So you don't look at the sheep parent, rather you look at the one of the higher age. Another mas'ala they mention is that if an animal's age and the description the fuqaha give as aid to deduce the age if they are not in tandem. So the animal is 6 or 7 months, but the sheep, but the hair is still not slanted on the back as they mentioned, or the teeth are not starting to come out, and the goat or the cow is already in its 3rd year, already in its 2nd year, then what do we give preference? Do we wait for the teeth, or do we wait for the wool or the hair on the back of the animal to come down as it should be to indicate the description we mentioned, or do we look at the age? Here, the age takes preference. The age takes preference. The age takes preference. Except in a couple of cases, like the Hanafi madhab, they say that the sheep must be 1 year old, but if it is 6 months old, the sheep is 6 months old, and it looks, its growth is as if it's 1 year old. Like if you put that 6-month-old to 7-month-old or 8-month-old with sheep that are 1 year plus, you won't tell the difference, then that animal you can slaughter too. Lastly, with regards to this, they mention an animal that is a hermaphrodite. So they say khuntha. So they say this is an animal that has male and female reproductive organs. So this animal, these udhiyah animals that have male and female reproduction organ, can you slaughter them or not? So here the ulama say you can slaughter them, because it cannot be more than either it's a male or a female. Either it's a male or female, one of them. It can't be anything else. Therefore, since you can slaughter male and you can slaughter female, then you can slaughter either of them. You can slaughter this hermaphrodite. It will be okay. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to teach us that which benefits us and to benefit us with that which He teaches us. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.